You know, it's really interesting. Projects never seem to get less complicated the more time you spend on them. So we're back at the bench for part 3 of our Quantar video series, and you'll notice things have gotten quite a bit more interesting. This mess of wires is what's required to link up a Quantar to one of the ham P25 networks. Specifically, I'm using the P25 link network stack by Juan Carlos XE1F, which allows you to link up to the MMDVM P25 reflectors and also the P25 network exchange reflectors. And Juan has his own reflectors as well that he calls the P25 link reflectors. So the core principles are the same regardless of which networking stack you choose. You need a Cisco router with a serial port that can take the V24 data frames that come out of the Quantar and convert them into HDLC stun packets, and those packets are then sent over the network to a Linux server of your choosing, which translates them over into P25 data that the reflectors can understand. You'll notice that there's a Dell micro PC stuffed inside the chassis there where the blank slot used to be. I'm running a hypervisor on there and running 2 virtual machines. I have a Windows box on there because you can only program the Quantars in Windows, and then I've got a Debian box on there as well, which is running all the networking backend and running the P25 link software for the P25 networking. So it's not as complicated as it seems, or maybe it is, I don't know. Either way, it's not as pretty and neat as a DMR repeater where you just plug in the network cable to the back, but P25 has a certain charm to it, and I'd take P25 any day over DMR. So like I said in the last video, the last thing I need to do before I throw this thing back up at the repeater site is give it a tune-up. So in line with the dummy load in the back there, you'll see I've added a ISO-T. And that is just so that I can sample some of the RF and put it into the RF connector at the back of the service monitor there. I could hook it up directly to the service monitor. The service monitor can take 75 watts continuous and 125 watts peak. But the Quantar is putting out 80 watts, and I'd rather not damage things if I can avoid it. So for the RF power measurements, we'll actually hook it directly up. But for everything else, so that I don't fry the input attenuators on the HP, we're going to run it through the ISO-T like it's set up now. And for those of you wondering, this is an ISO-T. It stands for Isolated T. Essentially what it is just a little through-line piece of rigid coaxial hardline with a variable coupling port on it. So this is essentially just a BNC connector with a little coupling loop on the end of it. And based on how far you insert that into the body of the T, determines how much RF power is coupled onto this port, and then you can run this off to things like a service monitor, spectrum analyzer, oscilloscope, anything you want, and you can measure high power RF signals without hooking it directly up to your test equipment and blowing it up. It's a really, really handy bit of kit to have. If you see one at a Hamfest or anywhere, definitely pick it up. They are invaluable when it comes to testing high power radios like repeaters and HF rigs. So I am by no means a professional YouTuber, but I'm going to try and do something a little bit cool here. I've got the programming computer window open here, and I'm going to overlay in a video of the service monitor so that you can see what I'm doing on the controls there at the same time that I'm doing stuff on the PC. So we're going to go ahead and connect up to the repeater. You just go to the connection screen, say connect dial, and it says successfully connected. We're going to go ahead and read it so that we get the code plug into memory. That takes a while. And once that's read, we're going to come over here to the service tab. And this is where things get interesting. We're going to go to the alignment screen, wait for things to load, and it'll tell us that it's going to put the station into access disable, which means nobody can talk on it while we're doing this, and that's fine because it's here on the bench and I'm the only one who can use it right now. And the first thing we're going to do is tune up the reference oscillator frequency. So you'll notice indicates there that the transmit frequency is 4435125, and you'll see on the left side here, the service monitor, I've got it set up for a tune frequency of 4435125. All we need to do here is key up, and we should see the meters jump to life on the service monitor and see how far off we are on frequency. So you'll notice there we're reading 0.026 on the frequency here in the top left, and that just means we're only 25 hertz high. Honestly, that's pretty good. I think the Motorola spec is plus or minus maybe a couple hundred hertz. We can get a little closer if we want to. So I'll just go ahead and click, and yeah, see there, we just went down by almost 50 hertz. So that might be about as good as we can get. And I think it is. So we're going to go ahead and leave it exactly where it is, D-key, and save. And the next step is TX deviation. So this controls how wide the station transmits, whether it be analog or digital. So what it's going to do is it'll key up at a couple different frequencies. It'll be transmitting a tone, an FM modulated tone, and it'll ask you to enter in what you measure for the deviation for that tone. And in the top right of the service monitor screen right here, you'll see we have a FM deviation meter. So we'll say key on frequency 1. It'll tell us what frequency it's tuned to right there, 438.025. So we will type in 438.025 megahertz. We hear our nice transmit tone there. I'll go ahead and turn the volume down a little bit. And we see we have almost a perfect 1 kilohertz, and we're reading 5.72, 5.73, something around there. So we'll go ahead and type that in, 5.73. And we'll do the same exact thing for the remaining 3. Key on. This one's 453.975, so we type in 453.975. We hear our tone again. And this time we're reading, we'll call it 6.14. Next frequency, so 454.025, we're reading we'll call it 4.60, maybe, yeah, 4.60, looks good to me. And finally, the last frequency, and we get 5.03, we'll call it. I don't think you have to be that precise. As long as you're within, I'd say, plus or minus 100 hertz, you're probably fine. So we've got all 4. We'll hit saved again. It'll dekey, and that's all there is to it. The nice thing about these stations is they kind of do everything for you. You just have to report what you're measuring, and it does all the calculations internally. Some of the older stations and a lot of the subscriber units, mobiles and portable radios from Motorola, you have to go in and manually measure and adjust the deviation at 8 or 9 different frequencies. There's a reason radio shops spend a lot of money on test sets that support auto-tuning. So we're going to skip power output and RSSI for right now. I don't have a calibrated power setup, and I don't have anything going into the receive port of the repeater. But we can do reference modulation compensation, and this one is actually very interesting and is a good showcase of some of the advanced features of the service monitor. So what we're going to do here is we're going to demodulate another P25 tone, but this is actually going to be a square wave. And we're going to look at the shape of that square wave and adjust the compensation value until we get it as square as possible. So the way I'm going to do that on here is set up some audio routing. So we route the demodulated FM audio to the oscilloscope. So we'll go into scope mode here. And you'll notice it says FM demod on there, which means it's pulling in its input from the FM demodulated audio. And I'll go back into the RF analyzer screen because I will have to change the tune frequency. And we'll go ahead and click Align Ref Mod 1, which will key up on the test frequency of 446 megahertz. We'll type in 446 megahertz, and we will go back to scope mode. And we'll have to adjust the triggering a little bit here, adjust the time per division. There we go, 50 milliseconds. And we've got a, not a very square wave there. So basically the goal here is to try and get that to look as close to a square wave as we possibly can. So I will play with the values here, and you'll kind of see how it affects the shape of the waveform. And one of the other things I'm actually going to check here is my filtering setup. Just to make sure I'm not filtering the high end, because you'll notice that looks very, not very square. And that could be because I'm filtering a lot of the upper harmonics that are required to actually get that square wave to be square. So I'll go back here and It's a little bit better. Still kind of a strange shape, and I think that's just kind of a you get what you get type scenario there. So I'm just going to try and make the lines as straight as possible, and I think that should be good. Stop right there and ignore everything I just said. I realized as I was trying to align reference modulation, I was starting to talk out my ass quite a bit and wasn't really confident in anything I was saying. So I decided to take a step back, do a little bit of reading, which is a new thing for me, and see if I couldn't get a little bit more info into this process to figure out exactly what we're doing and to explain it to you guys a little bit better. As it turns out, what we're doing here is actually a very old process for checking the response of a circuit. It's known as a low-frequency square wave test, and the article that I found that talks about it is actually from 1957. Essentially what you're doing is using the fact that a square wave is rich in odd harmonics to visually analyze the frequency response of a circuit without having to actually sweep it in frequency. The shape of the output square wave actually tells you quite a bit about the frequency and phase response of the circuit, and in this case we're trying to make sure that it's as linear as possible over frequency. There's a really nice diagram in this article that basically shows all the different types of output waveforms you can get and what they actually mean. And you'll notice specifically that waveform F looks very similar to the waveform we were looking at. And after I read this article, something in my mind clicked. The exciter alignment section of the Quantar service manual calls out several times that you should make sure the oscilloscope you're using for this test is DC coupled. And in the article they mention that that output waveform happens when your low frequency response is not linear, i.e. your scope is cutting off all the low frequency components near DC. So we go back to the service monitor here, and I check out our AF analyzer section, and you'll notice there's an option here labeled Scope 2. And all that means is at what point in the receive audio chain are we sending the audio data to the scope. So right now it's set to filters, and that is after both of these input filters here, filter 1 and filter 2. You'll notice filter 1 is a high-pass filter set to around 20 hertz. Now that's going to cut off pretty much everything close to DC, and for this test we actually specifically do not want that. For most other applications, testing analog audio response, you would want that because it would get rid of any DC offset that you might have. So I'll set that to input, which should bypass those filters. We'll go back to the scope screen. I'll key up the station again, and we should see a much cleaner looking square wave. And that is indeed a much cleaner looking square wave. Let me see if I can't get the triggering a little more stable. There we go. So I'm going to play with the reference mod compensation value again, and we should see the horizontal areas slope change. And you can see there it's getting a little more linear. The negative end is very linear at the moment. The positive end has a little bit of a curve still, so I'll see if I can kind of balance it out between them. I don't think we're going to be able to get them both perfect. The positive end, if I go too high, starts to get a little more rounded, so I think we'll stick to that. That's about as good as I can make it look. And if you read the blurb in the alignment tool here, you'll see that it says slanted lines on the horizontal are perfectly fine. As long as they're not round, your reference compensation is good enough. And the same exact procedure here for the second reference frequency, just trying to get those legs as straight as possible. And I think this looks pretty good. Well, for the 5 people who have made it this far in the video, congratulations. We're in the home stretch now. I've made 2 small changes to the test setup. I've got the output of the power amplifier running directly into the input of the service monitor. That's going to let us calibrate power output. And I also ran a second cable coming from the duplex output of the service monitor, and that's going into the receiver of the Quantar, and that'll let us align the received signal strength power levels. So I've got the power output alignment screen open here. And you'll see it says the rated output power of the Quantar is 110 watts. Now my service monitor, according to the data sheet, is able to handle 125 watts intermittent power. So I think this will be fine. I don't actually own any high power attenuators, and the only other way I could think of to do this without directly connecting it would be to use that ISO-T and calibrate it properly, characterize the loss with a vector network analyzer. And I didn't really want to do that, so we're just going to roll the dice here and see if I end up smoking anything. So it conveniently has all the steps needed right here on the service screen. It says press the PA and IT button. We're going to hit the PA and IT button. We're going to hit the key up button. We're going to read the power on the watt meter. Looks like it is 85, well, pretty solid at 85.4 watts. We will type that in, 85.4 watts. We will click adjust. We will check the new output power, 105 watts. I will take that. Factoring in cable loss, that's probably right around 110 watts at the output of the power amplifier. So I will go ahead and save. That should also dekey. And our power output is fully calibrated. Now, one thing you might note, my tune frequency was not actually set to my transmit frequency. The nice thing about this HP service monitor is it has a wideband power meter, so the tune frequency is only used for the demodulation and frequency error components, and it actually will measure RF input power regardless of what tune frequency you have set. So a nice little added bonus. You don't have to constantly punch in a new frequency if you're just measuring output power. So last but not least, we have RSSI calibration, and RSSI stands for Received Signal Strength Indicator. So this is used when you're troubleshooting the system. It lets you know that your received signal strength is actually correct and calibrated. The process here is very straightforward. Just input a frequency at the power that it recommends, negative 90 dBm, and hit go, and it'll do the rest for you. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the RF generator on the service monitor to output a signal at 448.5125 megahertz and at a output power of negative 90 dBm. So we go down to amplitude, type in negative 90 dBm, and that's all there is to it. We'll hit start RSSI calibration and let the station do what it needs to do. Okay, for about the third time in this video series, I got way ahead of myself. So that RSSI calibration we just did is basically totally invalid. The reason why is because of the RX preselector in the receiver that I mentioned in the first video. That is still going to be tuned to the previous frequency that the station was programmed to, and there's a very good chance that it is totally attenuating the signal at the current receive frequency. So I'm going to pop that open, show you what the RX preselector looks like, see just how far off it actually is, and show you how I retune it. And we're going to go ahead and stuff this thing back in. Like that. Drop the screw on the ground. Now, this is where a third hand would come in real handy. Oh, wow. I managed to put the pre-selector ear behind the mounting bracket. Well done. Let's try that again, shall we? Alrighty, put the receiver connector back on there and tighten that down. And lastly, put the front cover back on. And finally, put the receiver back in the chassis. And I'm not just pushing it in like that for dramatic effect. I've actually found that the best way to get the cards properly seated in the backplane is to give them a little bit of a running start when you push them in. Okay, receiver is back, installed in the backplane. I reran the RSSI calibration. It's good. The alignment's done. I'm done with this project. I don't want to see this thing on my bench anymore. It's too big, takes up way too much space. I sincerely hope that you guys enjoyed watching this mess of a series, and if you like my videos, go ahead and subscribe. It helps boost me in the mysterious YouTube algorithm. And I've got a couple more videos in the works with a couple more interesting things that I'm working on right now, and hopefully you guys find them interesting too. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.